Hello, y'all. Let me tell you, I am tired. I am so exhausted. But look, y'all done see that? New refrigerator. New refrigerator. Number one, I'd like to thank the two ladies that helped me out. I had one donate to help me replace all the stuff that I lost in the refrigerator, because I lost 8 pounds of ground beef, 10 pounds of chicken and sausage and frozen bacon. I lost it all. Gallons of milk. But she was a sweetheart and helped me replace all of that. And then I had another that donated some to help me pay for the delivery of the refrigerator. That helped a lot, thank you, Lord. But we got it done, and they didn't make me do anything. They come in and took the old one out, cleaned everything up, brought the old one in, set it up, everything. I didn't have to do much of anything. They even loaded the old one and hauled it off so it wouldn't sit out in my yard. But anyway, thank the good Lord that's done. I have a working refrigerator now, and thank all of you for your wishes that I get one, in your prayers, and all of you that offered help, and I really appreciate it. Anyway, today I wanted to talk about, you know, I live in Tornado Alley, and living here, I really have nowhere to go. I can go down on the railroad tracks, and I'm safer than I am up here, but as far as shelters and stuff, we have to go over to the church or somewhere like that. And that's even if they're open, then we can get in there. But, you know, and I was watching a video the other day about these cave exploring. Oh, before we go any farther, I wanted to talk about yesterday. My sister made me go out and walk 2 miles and back with her. It was great. But that's why I ended up so sick last night. I mean, I was so exhausted by the time I got back. It was just crazy. But anyway, I learned a new duck call, and it actually works. Do you guys want to hear my new duck call that I learned yesterday? Here we go. Here, duck. Come here, duck. It worked for me. Oh, anyway, back to the, whenever in the late 1960s, early 1970s, I have an uncle that lived out on the other side of Rogers in a place called Pleasant Ridge. And you guys have to realize that being from the Ozarks, there's 100 caves per every 5 miles here. But anyway, back whenever I was a kid in the late 60s, early 70s, when we had the threat of a tornado, all of our families would get together and we'd go down to this big cave that was just right down from my uncle's house. And it was like you pull off the main highway, or dirt road back then, and it was almost like a flat parking lot. It was an old shooting range, and on the other side of that shooting range was a big cave. And that's where we all gathered. They would take all of us down there. There's a lot of times I remember getting up in the middle of the night, going down there, and all of our other aunts, uncles, and their families would be there. But that's where we all gathered, is inside that old cave. That was the safest place around. And I remember that the whole inside that cave was like a white, almost like a white rock. It wasn't dark, it wasn't brown. It was like a white, and all the adult men would gather wood, and they'd build a fire right in the middle of that cave. And I remember being in there a lot of times in my pajamas, looking for a rock to crawl up on and hunker away until the storm was over. But I'll tell you what, that cave was so big, you could probably get 60 to 80 people in there comfortably and still not be overcrowded. That thing was so huge. But that's where we used to go whenever a tornado would hit. You know, family would call the other family, and that's where we'd meet. We'd all head to the cave, and we'd go down in that cave, and it was very comfortable, very dry. There was no water. It didn't seem dangerous or anything. But I just remember giant rocks all along the edge, and Us kids would get up there and lay on them or sit on them and around the fire, and there was plenty of room for everybody. When we were kids, between the ages of 5 years old and up to teenagers, we had to work. If there was anything we could do to help, we worked. And my dad, he had a full-time job. He was a tree topper, and back then he worked for the feather factory and all of that stuff. But on his days off, he would do like, he would go what they call metal scrapping, junking, where they pick up copper or brass or, you know, whatever, aluminum, whatever they could gather to sell. And he'd always take us older kids, which I was probably 7, 8 years old between there, and we'd go out to the shooting range on the days that they weren't out there shooting, and he'd give us each a box, and there would be millions and millions of them little brass 22 shells out there, and we'd spend all day picking up those shells, box after box of them, and then he'd take them down to the scrap metal place. And I never minded it because it always bothered me when I was picking them up. Of course, I was a kid, I wanted to play, but I always thought it was better once he come out there counting that money, because a lot of brass and a lot of money, and plus we helped keep things clean. And also during the late 60s and 70s, we had the landfill, and it was on a dirt road, and then you went down another dirt road, and you went down this dirt road, and when you come out into the clearing, it was a giant, I mean, like a bluff. And they were trying to fill all that in, so that was the city dump. And my dad's uncle, which we called him Uncle Mark too, but it was my dad's uncle, he run the Rogers landfill. And he had a little, when you went in, you had big space, and then the dump was way down here. You had to go drive down. And he built a little cabin there, and he lived in that cabin out there, which I don't know how he took the smell, but I don't know if he stayed out there all the time or not, but that's, when he was out there, that cabin is where he stayed. But everybody, everybody in Rogers dumped there, and they used to let my dad and family go out there and pick up scrap metal to sell and stuff. I guarantee you my dad made a fortune off of that place in aluminum and copper and brass, and he would get a truckload every time we went out there, and the money was crazy. But you know, as a little kid, I was probably, you know, between 7 and 10, and most of the time while Dad was out doing scrap metal, because the trucks would bring the garbage in and dump it on the top, because they would have to go to Uncle Mark, and then would have to go through and pick out the tires, batteries, some other things, I don't remember what it was, before the bulldozers come in and bulldoze it over the hillside. And it was a long drop. I mean, you could probably stack 4 or 5 cars end to end down the side of that hill. It was so tall, from the top to the bottom. So us kids wasn't too much allowed down in there, so we would stay up at the cabin. And a couple of years before that, Uncle Mark had found an old mannequin down there, and she stood like this, straight up. She had one leg that kind of bent, like she was walking, maybe, or fixing to kick something or something, I don't know. But he used to tell us kids, because he would go back out there, and us kids would be in the cabin alone watching TV or whatever. And to keep us from bothering that mannequin, he had every one of us kids convinced if you touch her leg or rub her leg, she'd kick you. And I was scared to death of that mannequin. I remember when I went in, I would walk all the way around, because she was right here by the door, and I'd go in and walk all the way around to stay away from her. He had every one of us convinced. All you gotta do is go there and rub her leg, and she'll kick you. She will kick you clean out of this cabin. So that's how he kept us from bothering that mannequin. But you know, being at city dump, you find all kinds of stuff out there that people threw away. A lot of stuff rich people threw. I remember one year, They had a diesel wreck in Rogers, and that wreck was full of cartons of cigarettes. Well, they had to pick up all the cigarettes. They weren't like wet or damaged. It was because they was in a diesel wreck. And they had to pick them all up and take them out to the city dump because the insurance company had paid for them. Since the insurance company had paid for them, they weren't allowed to sell the cigarettes or do anything else with them. So they just brought them out to the city dump and dumped them. I never seen so many people out there just picking up carton after carton after carton of cigarettes. It was crazy. My dad was the only one in our family at that time that smoked, and he got 4 or 5 cartons. And I mean, I seen people bringing cars out there and just loading trunk loads of cigarettes while they were out there. But I won't ever forget that. But there was sometimes my grandmother, my dad's mom, would go out there, and she was an older lady, and she'd always dig out things that she could craft with. She was a heavy crafter. And every time she wanted to go with us, my dad would say, well, it's going to be butts and elbows today. Of course, we didn't know what that meant. And I didn't know till later, till years, that Dad called it butts and elbows because he said, when your mom and your grandma got down there and got to digging, all you could see is them bent over, and all you could see is elbows and their butts sticking up in the air. You couldn't see even who it was. You could just see butts and elbows a-going. It was so funny, so funny. You know, there was a lot of times that we had to go help as kids. If we could walk to the table and eat, we could help. There's many times that we had to go help pick poke salad, and this is whenever the Allen Candy Company was there in the edge of Springdale, because there was Rogers, Lowell, and Springdale. Lowell was a little town. If you blinked your eyes, you missed it. And we'd go out, and all of us would walk the hillsides. If we were old enough to walk and climb a hill, we helped. He'd give us big bags, and we'd pick poke salad and throw it in that bag, and we had to take it to the car, and we'd dump it in the trunk. When the trunk got full, he'd take it up to the canning company and sell it, because they would pick the greens off the poke salad and they'd can them. And we made a lot of money that way. We'd all go out and pick wild blueberries, wild gooseberries, blackberries, all that. And he would sell them to the House of Webster, and the House of Webster bought them because they made blueberry jam and wild huckleberry jam and blackberry. And when he wasn't working his job, we all went out and helped on his days off, and that's what we did. We made extra money, and with 7 kids in the family, we had to. I mean, I can't remember ever a time that we didn't get to go to fairs, carnivals, circus, all of that. There was never any money for that. No matter how much money we made, there was never any money for that. And as a kid, we were pretty much forced to go camping. We would pretty much camp out all summer and only be in a house during the wintertime. Come summer, we'd be right back on the lake, and that's where we lived. And during the school year, we was in a house. And I think that's where my hate for camping came. And another thing I never understood, my mom and dad never, ever, as long as I can ever remember, my whole life, never put a garden in. That just wasn't their thing. And you would think with 7 kids they would try to raise a garden, but no. Gardening, yard work, that kind of stuff was not my mom and dad's forte. Us boys, my mom even made us boys help do dishes. We had to help clean house, do dishes. We had to help with it all. There was no girl job, boy job. It was everybody's job. I miss the 60s and 70s. I don't want to go back and work like we had to, but I miss that time. I really do. You know, we didn't get much of a childhood, and we didn't get much of a teenage at all. There was a lot of stuff we didn't get to do until we left home, and that was our first time doing things. The only time we got to watch cartoons is if we woke up and Dad was up on a Saturday morning watching Saturday morning cartoons. We didn't get to choose anything that we watched. Him and her ruled and run that TV, even when we were teenagers. But, you know, it is what it is, and it was what it was. There was one year my uncle didn't go to the cave, and the tornado hit his house. He had just built this new house too. It picked his house up completely off. They were in the basement, and it picked his house up completely off the foundation, turned it around, set it back down. They found his boat up in the top of the tree in their front yard. Their house was kind of tilted like that. You had to walk sideways in their house. And they had to tear it down. They just had got this house built. They had to tear the whole thing down and start all over again. But anyway, I just thought I'd come on and chat a little bit about, things we did back in the 60s and 70s and just give a little bit of insight of my time growing up in the Ozarks. And I loved running the hills. Can't do it anymore. But I loved it whenever we'd go out and we'd just run through the woods. Just go wherever. We never worried about getting lost. We always knew we'd find our way back one way or another. So anyway, I will talk to you guys later.